Okay, right. Well, thank you for asking me to speak to you today, and thanks to everyone who's decided to come along. Why join the trade union? The clerk's perspective. Well, okay. Hang on. Now I'm trying to change the page, and it's not letting me. Here we go. Right, introduction. Here we go. Right, I'm Tony J. As you've heard, I'm the triage officer for the ALCC, which is the Association of Local Council Clerks, and we are a registered and affiliated trade union. As you've heard, I'm an experienced parish clerk. I began clerking in 2013 and passed circa a couple of years later. Currently clerk for two parish councils. I also do regular locum work, and I'm an internal auditor for 8. And I'm a former police officer. Ooh.
Ooh.
I've been a police federation or a trade union rep for most of my working life. So this is something that really interests me. Representing people, helping people. Okay, so why I believe that all clerks should be a member of a trade union. Okay, now we all work in a vulnerable sector, we know that. Our job satisfaction largely depends on the attitude and behaviour of groups of people, councillors and members of the public. Now, you all know that councillors can act in different ways. They're all different. Some are very nice. They fully understand the work of the clerk. They appreciate them. Unfortunately, others don't. Members of the public. We always get our troublemakers, don't we? Our vexatious people, people who keep on at the clerk. They won't shut up. They perhaps do put things on Facebook. You know, all manner of things. But I'm sure you've got your own examples or your own thoughts about how some councillors and members of the public may not have a great attitude to the council or even to their clerk. Right, bullying and harassment of council staff is commonplace. Now, I cannot emphasise this enough. I'm the triage officer, which means that anyone who contacts the ALCC will submit what we call a ticket on our website. I get to read them. I get to initially deal with them, and you'll hear a little bit more about the ALCC process later. But sometimes it's just a quick phone call. Sometimes it's a bit more involved. But we get in the ALCC, and it's obviously an estimation, probably 10 to 15 of these tickets every week. So on average, what that would be, perhaps 2 a day. So there's 2 clerks who've come to us with a problem. Now we've got about 1,000 members. I think I read somewhere there's about 10,000 town and parish councils. Obviously, some clerks work for more than one council, but broadly speaking, you could say that 1 in 10 clerks are in our union. Now we've currently got 150 live cases. So out of 1,000 people, 150 have currently got a problem. So that puts it into perspective a little bit about the numbers that we deal with, and the bullying and harassment, which is by far the biggest matter we deal with. You know, as you can see, it is very prevalent. And this is probably one of the most important messages that I will have for you today. A very good working environment can easily and quickly change to a toxic one. You can be working for a council, everything's great, good councillors, no hassle from the public, and then what happens? A new councillor, 2 or 3 councillors join. Could be co-option. The council co-opts somebody that they think will be a valuable member, and it turns out that they're a troublemaker. At election time, of course, it's out of your hands. You have to have what you're given. And new councillors, by definition, they're not going to understand the process. They can suddenly become toxic against the clerk. This regularly happens. They think the clerk is their servant, their secretary. Do this for me, do that for me. It happens regularly. So also, of course, members of the public. If you get somebody move into your area who is a little bit of a troublemaker and starts to become a problem, might come to meetings, might always speak in the public participation if you have them, making a nuisance of themselves in meetings, more so, a nuisance to themselves with emails to you. What's happening about this? What's happening about not accepting answers? Um, Facebook. I'm a fan of Facebook in lots and lots of ways, but it also can be very horrible thing, can it? You know, the keyboard warriors. They all get on their local community website. What's the parish council doing this about this? Is the clerk an idiot? Yeah, you see these things. It's horrible. So all it needs is a little shift, and suddenly a very good working environment can turn into as I've called it, a toxic one. Um, I'm sure you're aware of that, but just remember it. Don't just think, oh, everything's great. Why do I have to worry? It could change. All right, question. I'm experiencing bullying or another work-related problem. Who can I turn to for help and advice? All right. Now, if you're not in a trade union, all right, you can go to fellow clerks, whose advice may or may not be correct. Now, I'm on the clerks' Facebook networks. There's regularly questions from clerks, but all manner of subjects, including what do I do about, the matters we're talking about. Replies will come on. I read them. Sometimes I think, yeah, that's good. That's a good reply. Others, I think, no, they got that wrong. And I'll go on there. And I don't like getting into long Facebook debates. You can spend all day doing it. But I will correct perhaps the clerk who was given a bit of wrong information in all innocence. So don't always rely on clerks. They are a great place to go to, our colleagues, but they're not always correct. So don't forget that. Family and friends. Oh, you'll say to your husband, wife, partner, whatever it might be, I've got a problem. What do you think? Now they'll listen to you. Of course they will. They'll give you advice, but they will probably not understand our sector. Well, probably I put that the wrong way around. They probably won't understand unemployment law, and secondly, and more importantly, they won't understand how it relates to our sector, because there's a lot of employment law sits above everything, but there's lots of areas of our sector that wouldn't fit into other employments. For example, no councillor can be the line manager of a clerk. Well, in every employment, you can probably imagine, everyone who's working will have a line manager. Whereas we don't have a line manager, the council are our line manager. A councillor can be a point of contact, and of course they should be a point of contact. The chair of the council, the chair of the personnel committee, possibly, probably. And you go to them, I want to take some annual leave, I've got a welfare problem, I want to, anything like that. But they're not a line manager. But of course, in every other section of employment, then that's commonplace. Your own research. Okay, there's a lot of research out there. Sometimes Arnold Baker's a great place to look for things, and lots of other. You can go on the ACAS website. I'm on there most days. Researching things. That's got a massive help. But you've got to make sure you're looking in the right places, and you're reading all the right things if you're going to do it yourself. Council policies. Right. You wouldn't believe the policies that Clerk sent to me. Send me your grievance policy, your complaints policy. And I read them and I cringe. They break employment law. You'll read things like, and this would probably, well, you might read something. The chairman is the only person who decides on dealing with complaints. They are the sole arbitrary person on that. Ridiculous. There are so many council policies that are completely wrong. Common sense perhaps, but if you go to the NALC, standard policies, model policies, and if you use them, then you can't really go wrong, but you'll be amazed the number of councils that don't. And then when I'm representing somebody, you get into a problem because the council will say, well, we've got our own policy and it says this. And I will say, no, that breaches employment law. That is an illegal policy. You can't have it. It's a minefield policies. Just make sure yours are correct and you're happy with them, because one day you might be being investigated under them. Okay, so that's if you're not in a trade union. Right, if you're in a trade union, such as I've used Unison, there are others, of course. Okay, what are you going to get from them? You're going to get a union helpline. So you'll ring them. Somebody will almost certainly answer the phone pretty much immediately. That's great. They will listen to you. I don't know. I'm not a member of these unions, so I don't know how it moves from there, but I would assume they allocate you somebody to deal with your matter and they come back to you. So that part of it, I would imagine is great. Um, Now, they can give you generic advice regarding employment law, and that will be very good advice. Well, I hope it would be. They know employment law. But as I've said earlier, do they know our sector? No, they don't. I go to meetings quite often with where they've got HR people sat in because the council, uses the services of an HR company. Now, it's the same principle as a trade union that is not the ALCC about understanding our sector. It's quite commonplace that the HR person will not understand this thing I told you about the line manager. They will not understand the basic concept that the council employ the clerk, but the clerk advises the council. It's a sort of dual situation. The only similar example I can ever think of is a magistrate's court. The magistrates make the decisions, but the clerk who sits in front of them in the court, that person gives them all the legal advice. Same with us, really. Councillors make the decisions, we give the legal advice. So it's on one stage where they're above us, if you want to look at it that way. On the other, we're above them. But would a unison rep understand all that? They may do, but they may not. Now, representation at meetings. I'll come on to what we do in a second, but if you have a process with when you're, having, unfortunately, you've been the victim of a grievance or a complaint, it normally starts with they won't, the council may call it, let's have an informal meeting to find the facts. Well, no, it's not informal. It's a meeting, but it will be an exploratory meeting. Now, I am not sure that union rep would come to that. Now, my wife is a member of Unison. She had a work-related issue a few years ago, and there was this initial interview, and Union said, "Well, we'll chat to you before, but we're not coming to it," and they didn't. That's one example. That may be isolated. I don't know, but you don't know that they're going to do that. Okay, but what will happen if you're a member of the ALCC? Okay, right. Well, firstly, I haven't put it as a bullet point. You'll ring our helpline. Now, I'm the person who answers the phone. If I don't answer it, it bounces down to another person and then another person. Now, bear in mind, we're all working clerks. We don't have a switchboard. I do my best to answer the phone. And of course, if I'm sat at my desk and it's in front of me and it rings, I'll answer it. If there's a voicemail that comes through, I obviously get that. I will ring back as soon as I can. If somebody puts a ticket in, I told you what a ticket is. If somebody puts one of them in, that pings up on my front screen. And unless I'm actually doing council work, which has got to be done that second, I'll go straight in and look at the ticket and start dealing with it. So and that at that point, as long sometimes I can have a chat with the clerk, the matter can be resolved, quite quickly, and that can be often the case. But if it's going to be more complicated than that, then you'll be excuse me, I'll put my teeth back in. You'll be allocated a dedicated employment support officer, and that person will be a fellow clerk. Now, probably 7 or 8 times out of 10, that will be me, because I get paid 20 hours a week, and the actual monitoring of the things that come in doesn't take anything like that. So I've got a lot of time left to be an ESO myself. But you'll get a dedicated ESO straight away. Right, I've covered this already, but you'll receive guidance and advice regarding employment law, which is specific to our sector. And I can't emphasize that enough, because we are working clerks. We know our job. that is one of the main benefits of the ALCC. Right, we will attend the interview that I spoke about, the first interview. Now, we are based all over the country. Again, I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. We can't always physically attend these meetings. That just wouldn't be practical. But we attend on remotely, on Zoom, Teams, whatever it might be. I do attend physical meetings. I've got one just booked in for next Thursday. But more often than not, they're on Zoom because that's the only practical way to do it. But we will be there, okay? Um, and this is, I cannot underestimate this, the help and support throughout the whole process. Now, when I'm representing people, it's quite common that in our first chat, the person will be in tears because they're suffering so much the way that they're being treated. Um, and I say, look, don't worry, let it out, let it out. It's often I'm the first shoulder that they can cry on. Um, and I listen to them, and sometimes I can be on the phone for an hour or more, just reassuring the person, look, don't worry, I can help you. There's lots of things we can do. You've got a friend now. It can be, pretty much as basic as that. Um, and then when I'm in the ongoing process, when I'm representing them throughout whatever they may be experiencing, they will call me regularly, sometimes at the weekend. Hey, Tony, look, I'm really worried. I couldn't sleep last night. Could you put my mind at rest over this? Okay, of course. And we have a chat. You know, that is the service that I give because I'm happy to do it. I've been the victim of complaints in the past. Crikey, when I was in the police, they say that the only police officer who didn't have a complaint is the one who didn't do any work. I had loads of complaints, and I've been through the mill myself lots of times, and I had that level of support from my police federation rep, and this is what I give to people now. So that is extremely important, the help and support that you would get if it happens to you. All right, examples of inquiries from members. Right, this I've got a sheet to read from now. This is the only time because I want to say everything in the right order. Okay, right. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Bullying or harassment from councillors, member of the public. Many clerks experience this. Sometimes it's an isolated problem with one councillor. Quick word with me, from me to the chair, will sort it out. Often it's more serious, with a group of councillors doing the bullying or even the whole council. This can include trying to micromanage the clerk. This is often what the bullying is. It's micromanaging. Um, Openly challenging the clerk's advice during meetings. Sorry, I've moved on from that. Let's go back to timesheets. Some clerks keep timesheets because they want to keep them. Some keep them because they're told to keep them. Either way, I haven't got a great view on timesheets. I personally prefer not to do it because it's an extra task. If you're in a situation where you feel that you're not being paid enough hours for the work you do, then timesheets are the most valuable tool you can use to prove the work you're doing. But it's a double-edged sword because some councillors, and I'm looking now at the chair of the personnel committee who thinks he or she is the line manager, they will say, right, I'm telling you exactly what I want you to put on the timesheet. I want you to do it like this. 9 a.m. started, 9:02, phone call to Mr. Jones about the problems with his bin collections. 9:03, deal with email from Mr. Smith regarding this. 9:06, toilet break. 9:08, I'm not exaggerating. I dealt with a clerk who experienced this a few months ago. It took a long time, firstly, to persuade the chair of the personnel committee that they are not the line manager, and secondly, that this is totally over the top. This is micromanaging, which is a form of bullying. We had a good result. The clerk still keeps the timesheet, but it's just on there what you'd expect it to be. 1 hour dealing with emails, 1 hour going to a meeting, etc. So timesheets, big thing, timesheets. All right. I've said openly challenging the clerk's advice during meetings. I've experienced that. You all know what it's like in a meeting. Council may ask for the clerk's advice on something. You may say, well, actually, Mr. Chair or Mrs. Chair or Chair, that's not legally correct. We can't do that. But when they come back, well, I don't agree with you. Well, why can't we do it? I've experienced it. You may have experienced it. Lots of clerks experienced it. It's an uncomfortable situation, especially if the members of the public are there. The clerk's being openly challenged. It happens. Uh, Bombarding the clerk with emails and phone calls. This can be councillors. This can be members of the public. You've got a limited number of hours, probably. Well, you certainly to do your work. You haven't got time to deal with the same person. All right, well, here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. You haven't got that time. You're busy. All right. individual councillors demanding that the clerk does something that has not been decided by the council. This is often the chair. I'd like you to write a letter saying, we as a council object to this. Well, has that been agreed in the meeting? No, it hasn't. Well, I can't do it. Well, I'm the chair of this council. I'm telling you to do it. It happens. Hopefully your chair is not like that, but there are many that are. Right. So, oh, hang on. I pressed my wrong thing then. Let's go back. Sorry, beg your pardon. Right. So, what happens when bullying comes in? Well, I tried to arrange a Zoom meeting with the chair, or vice chair, or the personnel chair. Depending, it could be that one of those three people are the actual person doing it. But I try and arrange a Zoom meeting with somebody from the council to try, and educate the council into what is bullying, what they shouldn't be doing. Try and sort out the issues. Now, there is little a clerk can do if the councillors refuse to change their ways. It's a sad fact of life that if a council acts badly, or if councillors act badly, are they going to change? Probably not. Probably not. If you're working for a council which is, I've used the word, I'll use it again, toxic, then you've pretty much got two choices. Stick with it, put up with it, which is terrible, or leave. That's the situation we're all in. Until they bring in proper sanctions for councillors for bullying, which I don't think will certainly not going to happen in the near future, and I'd love to see the day, but I'm not quite too confident it'll ever happen. Until that happens, then there's nothing to stop councillors acting in this way. Okay. Right. Let's move on to the next one. Contract of employment issues. This comes up, quite often. The clerk, some clerks do not have contracts. You'll be surprised the number who started work. Normally it's probably a small council, but they haven't got a contract. I say, well, why haven't you got a contract? Well, the council don't want to give me one. They're refusing. It's employment law. They can't do that. Now, if you take the NOC model contract of employment, which is the best, including the green book provisions and everything, then that's what I would hope to see as an example of clerk's contract. But when I read into them, there are changes, and they can be major changes. I nearly said a word I shouldn't have said then, but some councillor who thinks they know best has gone into it and thought, well, I don't like the wording of that. I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change that, and yeah, the chair is the line manager, and yeah, the clerk has to do this or that. These contracts are not always good for purpose. Take a look at your contract. If you're not happy with it, send a copy of it to me. But I'm not treating you as people who don't know how to do things yourself. Don't get me wrong, and I don't want to be bombarded with phone calls and emails. But just make sure you're happy with your contract of employment. And it may be, if it doesn't look like the model, NALC model one, then compare it, because you never know. Okay. Salary reviews, a big topic. What we're all paid. We all know that clerks doing very similar jobs get paid vastly different hourly rates. Now, there are sometimes, there's a good reason. If you live close to London, you would expect to be paid more than if you live perhaps in an outlying area like Cornwall or West Wales or Cumbria, because the cost of living is higher. So there's always that level. But equally, you might be working for your council on £14 an hour, but the neighbouring council that's exactly the same size, the clerk's getting £18 an hour. We are unregulated on this in our sector. And hand in hand with that goes the number of hours that you work. You may be on maybe clerk for a small council, 10 hours a week, let's say, but you're actually doing 14 hours, 15 hours. Well, if you're doing 15 hours and you're being paid £15 an hour, sorry, let me get this right. If you're doing 10 hours and you're being paid £15 an hour, then that's 150. But if you're doing which is £15 an hour, but if you do 150, sorry, I'll start all this again. I'm getting that completely wrong. What I'm saying is, if you're doing double the hours, you're actually on half the hourly rate, and you might find out you're working for £7 or £8 an hour. So it's very important that you're on the right number of hours for the work that you do. There is a matrix that comes out through local council associations and SLCC and NALC in different places. I don't like that matrix. It covers a lot of things. How many playgrounds have you got? How many of this have you got? What it doesn't cover are things like, do you have vexatious people who keep I'm getting my tongue tied now and I don't want to, who keep putting in FOIs? Doesn't cover that. Do your councillors do a lot themselves, taking the workload off you, or do you have to do everything? The matrix doesn't cover those. I left the council quite recently. I've been there for quite a few years. I was on 20 hours a week. That was adequate. And for me, as an experienced clerk, they went through this matrix. I warned them against it. It came out that it should have been on 15 hours. So they appoint a brand new clerk on 15 hours a week. And she's now ringing me all the time. Well, I can't do it all in my time. And I said, well, what can I say? I warned the council. Anyway, salary reviews and your hours. Now, if you're not happy with them, you can go to your council. You can ask for it to be reviewed. I can help you with that, and I'm happy to have one of these Zoom meetings with the council to explain, why the clerk should have more pay, more hours, um, or or the council can bring in an independent person to do a review. Um, I know people who do this, possibly 300 quid cost to the council. Depends on the council's attitude. If they care about their clerk and the number of hours that the clerk works, then they may well agree to that. Yeah, have a a review. Let's see if we're doing the right thing or not. Um, it does work, so consider that. I can give you more advice on that. If that's needed. Um, right, internal staffing complaints. Now this is more relating to when you've got a larger council with more than one person. This is a big part of my work. Um, Perhaps let's give an example. You'll have a 10 council with a 10 clerk, an assistant clerk, um, and a couple of admin officers. All right. Now, the sort of things that I'm dealing with, and I've got 3 ongoing at the moment. One of them is that the assistant clerk feels that the clerk is bullying her. She's given me lots and lots of evidence that would back that up. It's an ongoing investigation. I'm not going to go into any details. I'm assuming what the assistant clerk is telling me is correct. No reason to disbelieve it, but it's being externally investigated, and we await the result. Now, I've attended 3 physical meetings on that one. This is one of the clerks I talked to earlier who regularly rings me up and often is in tears. It's a very, very brave thing to do, to put in a complaint against your line manager, because of course the clerk line manages the staff going down. She's done a very brave thing, putting a complaint in, and it's very stressful. And I'm spending quite a lot of time helping her on that one. But I've got a couple of cases ongoing at the moment where the town clerk is being complained by, let's say, a more junior member of staff, if that's allowed, that phrase is allowed. These are, well, you've got, in my little fictitious staffing example, you've got the admin assistant. Now they are employed, it's in their job description, answer the telephone, deal with members of the public, deal with simple emails, that sort of thing. Now, in one particular case, this person thinks that they should be part of what you might think of as the management team. I'm being excluded. The clerk has regular chats with the assistant clerk about policies and events that are taking place, and I'm not being included. Now you'd think that should be quite simple. Well, actually, have a read of your job description, and you'll see what you do, and it doesn't include being involved in these sort of discussions. So with the greatest of respect, it's not what you're being paid to do. But no, this person I'm thinking of puts in 16 complaints against the clerk. Examples: of all these instances that they see that they weren't involved. Um, where would this lead? Would you have the groundsman who cuts the field? Does he come into the policy meeting to decide the policy on playgrounds? Where does it end? Anyway, the councillors, two councillors, um, dealt with the complaint, the grievance. Um, Quite rightly, they dismissed it. Um, Then she appeals, and now we're going through a process where an external company have been involved at great expense to go over these investigations. Now, I've already been to 3 meetings with the clerk on Zoom. It's an extremely stressful time for the clerk because, to put it bluntly, this is a load of nonsense. But she's going through the mill because this one person just cannot get it into their head what their role is. All right. Um, I had one case I dealt with just before Christmas last year, where similar sort of setup, uh, town clerk, a deputy and an assistant. Um, the clerk leaves, and it was pretty apparent that she had not been a disciplinarian, and they had a pretty slack environment. Anyway, a new clerk comes in and says, "Right, I'm going to tighten things up." It wasn't in a nasty way. It was just, we're not going to spend half an hour doing the crossword together in the morning. It was things like that. You're here to work. Uh, Quite reasonable. What else would you expect a clerk to do? Anyway, one of these kicks off, puts in a complaint. I don't like my new working environment. And one example that he gave was that I like to set the heating control in the office. Um, if I come in and I think it's too cold, I'll turn it up, and if I get warm, I'll turn it down. And the clerk has said, no, there's proper, um, there's proper heating, 21 degrees or whatever an office should be. Can you leave it on that? And I don't like that, so I'm putting a grievance that I'm now not allowed to change the heating. You know, I have to deal with things that sometimes I scratch my head and think, is this right? Is this really? But that was an official matter that was investigated. Um, um, Sadly, the councillors who've known this deputy clerk for a long time, he'd worked there for years, they sided with him, and they told the clerk, back off, allow them to carry on as the way they are. Unbelievable. Well, the clerk, wasn't going to do it, and she left. She'd only been there about 6 weeks, and she left. Terrible, terrible situation. It's as I say, sometimes it's unbelievable. Threats of redundancy. Quite often, a clerk will contact me, particularly from a smaller council. Um, Members of the public are demanding that we don't have a clerk. Why are we spending all this money on having a clerk? I'm worried because they're going to operate without one. Well, look, all right, employment law. Any employee can be made redundant if their job no longer exists. If you've got a bricklaying firm, a builder who's got bricklayers and the work's drying up and he doesn't need 6 bricklayers, he only needs 2, so he lays 4 off. That's commonplace. But in our sector, the council must have a proper officer. The job exists. Now, it doesn't mean that the paid clerk, can leave and somebody will do it voluntarily, because the job exists. It's being done by someone. The being paid is irrelevant. So it is illegal to make a clerk redundant. Okay, that is set in stone. But a lot of councillors and members of the public who demand, the clerk's got rid of, that is quite common. They do come up with that. So I reassure the clerk it can't happen. Now, if it goes further, we deal with it, etc., etc. But no, you can't be made redundant. Threat of disbanding the town or parish council. This is becoming a little bit more prevalent. Members of the public normally, why do we need a council? Why do we need to pay all these council taxes? Let's get rid of it. Well, look, there is a strict procedure here, which is in the Electoral Commission guidelines. All right, I'm not going to go into it in massive detail, but basically there has to be a public referendum that would support the disbanding of the council. Then there has to be a cooling off period of 2 terms of a council, 8 years. 8 years. There has to be a cooling off period for 8 years. Then there's another referendum. And then if that referendum still says that they don't want to council, then it goes to the Secretary of State, who has to approve the disbanding of the council. Now, I looked a while ago, and I can't remember what the actual years were, but it's certainly in recent years, in a 12-year period, the Secretary of State had numerous applications and only granted 5. So it's very, very rare for this to happen. But as soon as the clerk gets wind of it, are we going to be disbanded? Are we going to lose our job? We take that, I give the advice, and hopefully then the clerk advises them what they need to do, and they all shut up. You never know. Okay, right. I can't work here anymore. What can I do apart from resigning? The clerk is so fed up. I touched upon this earlier. Except that councillors and or members of the public will probably never change their behaviour. And if you stay, the problem will probably not go away. As I said earlier, that's terrible. It's an indictment on our sector. But until they bring in these sanctions against councillors who act in this way, then there we are. Members of the public, if they are, having a campaign on Facebook against the clerk or the council, then you can go to the police. We've all seen examples of people being prosecuted for things they put on Facebook. That's been in the news a lot recently. So, if you're really upset with what happens on social media, then you've got that avenue, the police. Hopefully the police will take it seriously. But the underlying thing, if you stay, you're going to get it. And it ain't going to change, unfortunately. All right. If you make a conscious decision to leave, right, well, it's come to the point you just cannot stay. And I have this conversation, unfortunately, much too regularly. You've made that decision, you're going to leave. Right. I will say, look, what evidence have you got of this? Is there emails? Is there, if it's verbal abuse in meetings, do you have councillors who will back you up and make a statement that that's happened? If you're going to say that I've been badly treated, you've got to prove it. So if this is an ongoing situation that, heaven forbid, one of you are experiencing, then just make sure you're collating all this. The assistant clerk I'm representing, she was able to produce emails back from 2021. She had kept a record over a long time. You would need to do that. Provable examples are required. All right. And then, so then what would happen? So the clerk can prove this behaviour. They are now determined they want to leave. By definition, if the council are bullying the clerk, they may not want the clerk to stay. So I will contact the council and say, look, it seems to me that the working relationship between the employer and the employee is irrevocably broken down. So how about having a discussion about a severance of employment agreement? Now, this is a legal document produced by a solicitor. The council pay is about £400, and it says that both sides agree to terminate the employment on the following terms. Now, you always ask for a lump sum severance payment. Now, I always start by saying 6 months, 6 months salary, lump sum upfront, is non-taxable. So I would say to the council, if you want this clerk to leave, then would you be prepared to pay 6 months salary? What I don't say is, because if you don't, she's likely to go, or he's likely to go sick for 6 months, and you're going to have to pay them anyway, and then they'll leave. But I don't say that, but that's what I'm thinking. So anyway, you put that there. Now, they will not normally accept 6 months. They'll come back, what about 3 months? And you have bartering, and you hopefully will come to some sort of level that is acceptable. And so the clerk would get a one-off payment. Payments I've had in the last year, largest, I think, 22,000. I've had a couple in the teens, and many 7, 8, 9,000, that sort of level. So this happens regularly. In that severance agreement, there will be normally 2 things. One is a non-disclosure agreement on both sides, so the clerk can't go on social media, etc., and say they were a terrible council to work for, don't work for them, even though I don't think they'd ever get caught, they could not go on the clerk's Facebook page and say, I've just left this council, don't work for them, they're horrible. You would be breaching the non-disclosure agreement, but would you ever get caught? I don't know. But there's that, and equally the council then can't go public and say we had a terrible clerk, we had to get rid of them. So you've got a non-disclosure, and lastly there would be a condition that they would give you a standard reference. So if you apply for another job and they come to the council, give you a reference, the standard reference is simply this person was employed by us between these dates, full stop. They could not give a reference. Oh, don't employ this person. They're useless. They can't do that. So that is a severance of employment agreement, which, as I've told you, happens quite often. But if the council do not want to go for the severance of agreement, which sometimes they don't, then the clerk has to resign. They have to state that this is constructive dismissal, and then they will institute proceedings towards an employment tribunal. Well, if that happens, we go through a similar process again. I contact the council and I say, look, the clerk has put you on notice, they're taking you to a tribunal. Employment tribunals frown on cases that actually come before them because they like settlements to be made. So we've already talked about a severance of employment agreement of a certain amount of money. Now we would like to talk about a out-of-court settlement for an employment tribunal. Now the ALCC employ a solicitor who prepares a figure, which is a figure that they would assume, using all the right matrices, would be awarded at a tribunal if the case is proved. And bearing in mind, if the clerk hasn't got all the evidence, because we covered that earlier, of this behaviour, then we wouldn't have got this far. Because I'd have just said to the clerk, sorry, you haven't got the evidence, you'll have to just walk away. That's why it's so important to keep evidence. Anyway, so you go to the council, you say, right, well, what do you really want to do? Do you want to go to a tribunal? Currently, there's a backlog of about 2 years for them to be heard. So do you want to employ a solicitor to represent you? Do you want to run the risk of you losing the case? In which case, if you lose it, then you'll have to pay the costs of the clerk. Plus, the tribunal will frown on the fact that you've turned down a settlement, out-of-court settlement, and you would no doubt be given a much harsher financial penalty. More often than not, the councils will settle out of court, so the clerk would get their payout in that way. And if it does go to an employment tribunal, the clerk has to fund their own defence. All right. However, and this is quite important, check your house insurance policy, because I hope you've got a house insurance policy. Almost certainly it will say in there legal expenses, legal cover. All right. If you've got legal cover, then that will normally cover all your legal expenses in going to an employment tribunal. All right. But what I'd say, always check with your insurance company first. But ultimately, I don't think I've ever had a clerk come back to me to say, no, my policy wouldn't cover me. So in other words, you wouldn't have to pay your own legal costs for the tribunal. But it's a trying time. I don't suggest going into this lightly. It's hanging over you for a couple of years. It's not nice, but it's there for you. And this is what we advise on. All right. Okay, I'm just going to tell you a little bit now about the ALCC. We've got a chair, a secretary, and a treasurer who are all volunteers, all clerks, all volunteers. There's me. I get 20 hours a week. I'm on grade 30, which is £20 something an hour, which I think is fair for the work I do. I don't like to think I do 20 hours a week. I probably do more, but there we are. I'm shooting myself in the foot there. But there's me. Right, we've got 12 committee members representing the regions. So 2 for the Southwest, 2 for the Southwest, 2 for the Midlands, etc. There are vacancies. Bearing in mind, we're there. Well, I'm paid, but everyone else is a volunteer clerk. So you have to be prepared to do this in your own time. It's not an onerous task. There's, you go to meetings every 3 months, mostly on Zoom, but you're there to be a representative of your fellow union members. So, if anyone of you are even thinking about, I wouldn't mind being a committee member, contact me. I will give you more details. It may be there's no vacancy in your area. There are elections every 4 years, a bit like a council. So we all have to stand again. Um, but in reality, if you wanted to be a member, I'm sure we'd fit you in somewhere. Um, and then we got the ESOs. I talked about ESOs earlier on. Okay, now ESOs are clerks who have received a lot of training in employment law, teach them how to do the role. A lot of it is self-trained from the ACAS website. And if you've got even the slightest interest in this subject about how grievances should be dealt with, I mean, all manner of things, go on the ACAS website. It's all on there. Okay. But anyway, um, committee members, not all, some are ESOs. We have ESOs who are not committee members, but they are members of the ALCC. Um, so we're always looking for more ESOs. Right, if you are one, when you get a new case, you've probably read this already. If you if you get a new case, you get £50 straight off, and that could be a case that takes you one phone call. It has to go through payroll; it's taxable, but yeah, you get 50 quid. Now, if you've got to attend a meeting, you get £100 for the first meeting that you attend to represent someone. That might be on Zoom, and then £50 for subsequent meetings in that case. Okay, I don't get those payments, by the way, because I get it as part of my pay, but that's what an ESO would get. I emphasize again, many meetings are remote, and we don't have to be committee members. So if anyone is thinking, I wouldn't mind doing a bit of this, then, get in touch. We'd welcome you. How to join the ALCC? Quite easy. Go on our website, click on, there's the link. Um, you pay your annual subscription of £50. Don't forget to click on the request button. We often get people, I've just joined, can you send me a receipt or an invoice? Well, why didn't you click on the button? So that's pretty basic, but there we are. £50 a year, I think that's very, very reasonable. A pound a week, what's that? A bag of crisps from Tesco's a week. Um, it will cost you more to be in somewhere like Unison. I think they do their rates graded on what your salary is. We don't. It's just 50 quid. It's been there for quite a few years. You know, Possibly it might go up to £60 before too long, inflation. If it does, I'll be asking, could we have a system where everyone pays £5 a month on a direct debit? Because, all right, £50 doesn't sound much, but that's a trolley full of groceries at Tesco's, isn't it? So you're paying that out as a one-off. It might be easier if we can have a system that you paid monthly, if you want. Um, so that's the cost. Uh, right, new members, when you join, you don't receive ESO support during your first month. Uh, I think union membership is basically an insurance policy. You take out holiday insurance, you take out house insurance, uh, but hopefully you'll never claim on them. So you might, well, why did I pay for that holiday insurance? I didn't use it. Well, but what happens if you had a problem? And this is why I think union representative is an insurance policy. You join up. If you get a problem in the future, immediately we're there for you. Um, Now, it wouldn't be fair. I've got a problem, I'm going to join. That wouldn't be fair. It's a bit like saying, my house is burning down, let's take out an insurance policy. You know, Everyone who pays their £50 and doesn't get support gives us the money to support the people who need the support. Common sense. Okay, so we say that you don't get ESO support during your first month because you can't just come to us when you've actually got a problem. Now, in other words, there's a complaint made against me from a member of the public. Now, if you have got an ongoing problem like bullying that's gone on for quite a long time, then of course we'll take you on, and help you. But you can't just join us because you've got a nasty complaint come in. Um, but I've put here, however, I am happy to give initial advice during the first month. So if somebody's joined, um, they ring me up and say, look, I've only joined. I know I can't, probably get advice, help for the first month, but could you just, help me, give me some, general sort of stuff, and of course I'll talk to them, and of course I'll help them, and then I'll say, look, try and delay things if you can, and if the first meeting, if that's the case, is going to be held, then try and delay it till after a month, and I'll come along. If I was to go before the month, I wouldn't be covered by insurance, so it's not in my interest to do that. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom. Okay, I've painted a nasty picture, haven't I, of all the horrible things that can happen. But, you know, lots of clerks work in very happy environments. The vast majority do not experience work-related problems and are very happy in their role. I've worked for quite a few councils. The majority of them have been great, never a problem. I've resigned from two for bullying, um, but most of my time has been great. So don't think, oh my word, I better get out of this sector. It's horrible. You know as well as I do, it's not like that. All right. But as you have heard, things can easily change. And that is why you need the support of a trade union such as the ALCC, in my humble opinion. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. My contact details, there's my email, triage@alccunion.co.uk. Take a photo of it on the screen or do whatever you want to, if you save it. That's my work phone number. That is not the work, that's not the number you'll get on the ALCC website, because that number is the one that I spoke about earlier, and it's the round robin one that goes to different people. If you want to speak to me directly, that is my number. Happy to take any calls from you about questions or anything like that. And there we are. That's the end of my little presentation. So thank you very much for listening.